Good evening, friends of God, whoever you are and wherever you are on this journey of growth and service, we welcome you. I'm Reverend Jackie Belisle from the National Ministers Council leadership team, and I welcome you this evening for an hour of, what I hope to be enriching and deepening collegial conversation on the process in which we're currently engaged in ratifying proposed revisions to our national covenant and code of ethics. We're so glad you've joined us, whether you're here live or taking in the recording. I want to just turn to my colleagues, Jerry and Corey, for a brief word of introduction from each of you, and then we'll start in prayer.
So I'm Jerry Bertelson. I serve on the leadership team of the Ministers Council and also serve a church right outside of Sioux Falls in South Dakota. Glad to be with you tonight.
And Corey Fields, pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Newark, Delaware. I previously served with a local chapter when I was in the Central region. These days, I don't have a stated position with Ministers Council. I just annoy Jackie when I can.
No.
Thanks.
The world needs people who volunteer for things. Very good. Blessings to each of you. Thank you for your role in tonight's conversation. And Joyce, since it is the four of us here in the early hosting minutes, I would invite you to just say a word about your heart for this conversation. You've been so faithful. Tell us a bit about you.
I had this wonderful ethics professor in seminary. Some of you might have heard of him. His name is Max. He stimulated just my interest in how important ethics are in Christian ministry. That just and when this came along, it was a couple of years ago we started.
We've been working a couple years. Yep.
Yeah, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so important. And the more I looked at it, some of the things were really good. Other things seemed a little wishy-washy. and there were areas that I thought nobody ever touched anyway.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
it's a good thing.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and for all of your ministries, formal and informal, and for being such a steady presence amongst these conversations.
I try.
Let's pray. Holy One, on this day we bring our imperfect selves. We bring our convictions of heart and mind as we review again with each other and for our broader field of colleagues the discernment processes, the writing and listening processes that we've been engaged in for the sake of joyful, healthful, just ministry in the name of Jesus Christ. We thank you for the table of conversation you've set before us tonight, and we ask for your blessing and multiplication upon it. In Jesus' name, amen. So we do always try in our hour-long sessions of MC Live to ensure we have some time for announcements. Tonight I am gonna veer off course for a moment so that Jerry can do the announcement about the retreat, and we'll do the rest of the announcements at the end of the hour. Jerry?
Thank you, Jackie. So I want to share a little bit about an exciting opportunity coming up in the fall for ministry leaders, and we are going to be hosting, the Ministers Council are going to be hosting a retreat on October 31st through November 3rd, and it is both a retreat and it's our biennial business meeting as well. So both of them will be merged together, and it'll be a wonderfully exciting time of storytelling. We're going to have the opportunity to have three wonderful storytellers and workshop leaders guide our discussion and guide our time together. And one of them being Reverend Donald Davis. He's a world-renowned international storyteller, and he makes the rounds on the storytelling circuit. And he's also a pastor, has been a pastor prior to his professional storytelling career. So he's going to get us kicked off on our first night with some storytelling, followed by a couple of days of gathering together to discover and unpack our own stories and find ways to craft those in a way that can be incorporated into our informal conversations and more formally into the preaching experience. And then our own minister council colleagues, Reverend Cheryl Harris and Reverend Lynn Story Bunce, are both going to be leading discussions and facilitating some workshop time in helping us continuing to unpack our stories, particularly in relation to how our stories and other stories can be held in a sacred space for us to discover new ways in which our stories can encourage us and challenge us, and in and through our storytelling find a safe and sacred space to be able to grow together. So it's going to be held at St. Benedict Center in Schuler, Nebraska, which is about 45 minutes outside of Omaha. And so there's an opportunity to register, and you can find more information on the Ministers Council website. There's a flyer right on the main landing page and a link to register. And if you travel in to Omaha or fly into Omaha, there's also some traveling options available from getting people from the airport to the retreat center and vice versa. So we'll be taking care of travel that way. So if you're interested in any part of this retreat, we'd love to have you there. It'll be a great time of both rest, renewal, and some time of just telling our stories. So hoping you're able to make it. And if you have any more questions or anything, feel free to reach out to me, or you can go to the website and find more information there. So thanks, Jackie.
All right, thank you so much, Jerry. For those who are joining us, again, that was Reverend Jerry Bertelson, who's on the retreat planning team and part of our national leadership team. Encourage you to check out that link. So that's one announcement for upcoming things, and we'll do the rest of the announcements near the end of the hour. I want to just center now in some thoughts of an outline for our conversation together. We would just desire collegial conversation about this important topic and situate that within and outside of some step-by-step clear updates on the document and the process as needed for you. We'll tailor the conversation this evening based on your own sense of familiarity with the process and the document that encapsulates our proposed revisions. So maybe if you could just in the chat box now, let me know on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being most familiar with this process and 3 kind of least familiar with what we've done so far in the document itself. How would you rank yourself here? A scale of 1 to 3, 1 being most familiar and 3 blank slate. I think that'll determine whether it's a 30-minute or a 60-minute conversation, maybe.
2.
2, we got a 2, Lori. Yeah. Yeah, scale of 1 to 3. What do you think? Joyce, Gloria, how familiar are you with the process so far?
Probably 2.
Yeah. All things in moderation.
Well, there were several meetings I was unable to attend, so I don't think 3 is a good qualifier.
All right, very good. Well, I think with the 2s and 3s, I'm going to say Corey and Jerry. Well, let's see. You get a chance to vote. How would you say that if you're voting on July 21st, 2022?
You said a scale of 1 to 3?
Yeah.
3 being most familiar?
Least familiar.
3 is least familiar. Yeah. Well, I can't do most familiar because, as I've said in the things posted online, I wasn't involved in the process myself, but come as a supporter of it. So I don't know, maybe a 2 once you brought me up to speed, Jackie.
I have to say 1 since I was part of the revisioning team. So yeah, maybe 1.2.
All right, very good. Thanks for that, folks. That'll help me. I think we won't skimp on details and we won't get lost in the weeds. How about that? Very good. So in a moment, I'm going to do some screen sharing and put your eyes on a couple of things on the website. But, you know, just to refresh your memory about who we are, we're the Ministers' Council, and we care about inspiring excellence in ministry. Among those important topics of excellence being our ethical framework, the sense of personal development and integrity we bring to the ministry in all manner of dilemmas that are ethical. We might hear that thread being things related to our awareness of power, context, self-awareness generally. You might be able to flesh that out as we go along in the course of the conversation. But since 1938, we've had a code of ethics, and it was last officially updated and appropriately ratified in 2006. So that's on our website under the resources tab, the 2006 version of that. I'll share links in a couple of minutes. And that document hadn't been updated in about 12 years. And so in 2018, a number of our national chapter representatives and board members, our leadership team, held a conversation. It's the internet age, and maybe other things should lead us to revisit this. And so a couple of scouts went out. I would call them Joshua and Caleb, or Jerry Bertelson and our colleague Steve Neal, and thought on the document. We desired from the beginning to honor the fact that it's been a well-crafted consensus document in our very diverse family for a long time. And so, you know, we had a conservative instinct. Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, about how drastically we were being called to evaluate. They brought back 3 initial ideas for things that could be updated: social media and plagiarism being, of course, a product of conversations about the internet age. And then also an instinct that in the paragraph where we talk about how we won't use our power, maybe we should also talk about how ethical people strive to use their power, right? And so we're gladly received that report. And at that 2019 business meeting, as we were discussing these 3 early ideas, there was a leading that there may well be more arenas of desire for updating, improving in the wider field of colleagues. And so we should craft as inclusive and efficient of a process as possible to listen for that. And so that's Jerry and Steve and our colleague Dan Hopkins and I worked for most of the next couple of years on that process. Jerry, would you want to add anything about that committee's work before I just share the highlights, your sense of that process?
No, I don't think I'd add anything to it. I reiterate what you mentioned earlier, that we started off with the premise that the document itself was solid in many regards, and we wanted to honor the core of that document and add and amend things. You amend some language based upon contemporary needs, and so that was sort of the philosophy we brought into the revisioning process.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that, Jackie.
Perfect. And so we started with a survey link in the late fall of that year, 2019, that was open for about 3 months and promoted in our newsletter and Facebook groups and correspondence to the chapter reps. And we had about 300 people respond to that survey in English or Spanish, digested that. And then what I'd like to, I'll want to flip back and forth between screen share maybe and my notes, having a printer failure this evening, but I want to just give you a viewing of this document. What I'm about to share here that's highlighted in the blue and gold, this is on our website on the landing page. And so an easy way to get to it, I'll throw a link also in the box in a second, but just to kind of give you a visual sense, after that survey that went out, and listening to people say yay, nay, or I have something better about the language on the first three, and then what else do you think we should think about, right? This is the product that that first listening stage kind of started in motion. And so those three initial ideas of leading about social media and power and plagiarism are in the yellow. And then all these blue sections, including the way that the document itself is organized with this tripartite thing of centeredness, competence, and collegiality, these categories, and all this other blue text, are sections that were revised in some significant way based on feedback from that survey. And then some of the conversations that happened later in that year. We're talking about 2020, when people still weren't Zoom fatigued and showed up for focus groups and chapter representative meetings and such. So that summer, we corresponded with the executive ministers, and in a couple of places here, executive minister feedback and proposed language informs the document. We had a focus group on social media. What the heck does proper use of it mean? The committee ultimately decided, in listening to people, that constructive use of social media might be a fairer way to say something about which we are striving. We also had a focus group on the topic of health, which some of you may remember. When we go through the document in a little more detail, we'll spend some more time with that paragraph, but you'll see in the centeredness paragraph B that that's where the language has resided previously about maintaining healthy habits. And we had a wonderful constructive moment in the spring of 2020 where people started to see the shape of our early thinking. And a few colleagues pushed back about the extant version's phrase, I will maintain healthy habits, and just educated the rest of us on how there might be a slippery slope, some negative unintended consequences of putting a health status in a ethical document. And so this language about well-being and striving in discipline to tend to our well-being, represents really the fruit of some sustained collegial conversation invited by a few of our colleagues. Then just to close on the process part, beginning in September and October of that year, we shared the final draft with our chapter representatives. A number of chapters invited us to do Q&A sessions with them. I think we had 3 or 4 open Q&A sessions like this, and carried that feedback into the vote in November of 2020, where our national representatives did approve this document to send to the next phase, that being the current phase of getting it ratified by 2/3 of our chapters. I'm going to stop there and just see if you have any questions about the process to date before we spend a couple minutes with the document. Questions, comments? I know I should do a PowerPoint on this, but
A lot of work went into it.
yeah, I think kind of a timeline thing that shows that, and really our deliberate, the deliberation around listening and trying to have as diverse of conversations as we could with our body. So since we're some 2s and 3s here, I'm gonna just spend a little bit more time on this document. My most succinct notes were caught in the printer, but oh well. I'll say this, that we heard an earnestness from the survey results that led the committee to propose an added sentence in the covenant, the preamble. That's in blue. When needed, I will seek out best practices from others and share my guidance when it might edify and empower wise choices for others. We hear that proactivity we want to put in there about being engaged with others in our time of need, our time of having something to share. So that's a new piece. Again, the centeredness heading is new.
Can I'm sorry, Jackie.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I really like that sentence, but I'm so curious where it came from, because that's just not your typical sentence that just comes out of nowhere. I mean, it's not, I don't even know how to say this. It's not like really task oriented. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, like constructive use of social media or financial responsibility.
Sure.
Maybe you don't have anything else to add to that, but I was like, that's a really nice thing to add. I wonder where that came from.
Sure. Jerry, can you archaeology dig your memory on those stages? I have a partial answer.
On section B?
Actually, no, this, in the second paragraph, the piece about
paragraph.
seeking out and, help and sharing with others.
Sorry, where's that at? Second paragraph, the one that's highlighted?
Yeah, up here in the preamble, the highlighted in blue sentence.
When needed, I will seek out best practices. I honestly don't recall. I think I don't recall what the development of that was. I know there was some discussion early on about the phrase best practices, and we wanted to highlight and encourage that to be part of sort of our covenantal work. But in terms of the wordsmithing of that sentence, I can't recall specifically. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there is, you're jogging my memory on that origin. I mean, the best practices piece, indeed, as kind of a thing woven throughout. Remember, this process comes on the heels of our dedicated programs for Together in Ministry covenant groups. And so, like just the idea of sharing with each other and not being lone rangers. And my recollection, Lori, would be that in the survey and conversations around the survey, there was some hand-wringing and confession and maybe cynicism that enforcing the code of ethics always seems kind of elusive, no matter what we put on the paper, right? And so I think we were listening to a thread about the dangers of lone rangers, kind of generally, and maybe that, danger to ourselves and to our ministries of being lone rangers, right? And I would guess that led to that section, and then just to close this part, Lori, that you notice that there's principles in the preamble part, right? There's call and covenant and the great commandment, and so this isn't like a task necessarily. I'm going to seek out best practices and share my wisdom, but I think it tries to articulate a posture with each other. Gloria has her hand raised. Gloria?
You.
Yeah, go ahead.
In looking over the document, just so that we would be more familiar with me, I'm a New Jersey pastor.
Mhm.
I kind of resigned or pulled out, however you may want to see it. And so in 2019, so I am coming back into the fold, and let's, so to speak, in terms of with a readiness to take on the giant once again.
Mhm.
I'm very much familiar with Ministers Council. My dear friend Dee Dee was part of New Jersey for what felt like forever before she moved to Florida. So I get it. In reviewing the document, the concern that I have is it's so subjective. I came to my call following a pastor who had been there for 38 years. And I honestly don't think he would think any of this applies to him.
Yeah.
When needed, it would never be needed. So as it would relate to the individual seeing themselves as it would relate to, if you're dealing with a problematic pastor, who's going to see it as I need help unless he or she has hit rock bottom? So some of the challenges that I have with the document is that it's very subjective, and the assumption is you're dealing with a healthy person. But very often when we get caught up in ethical issues, the person is not healthy. And that's the dilemma that I'm encountering.
Well said, and thank you for being here and for sharing a glimpse into some challenges you've experienced along the way. You know, I think part of what I'd offer as we share more about this is that you know, there's the process of, should we have a written document, and is the current one as good as it could be? And so, you know, taking on a collegial project to improve it in some ways, leaving it, and this is a conversation that's happened for 3 years, Gloria, in some way or another, exactly what you're saying, right? Like leaving it enough at the level of principles and aspirations that it's not a tool that could be used, you know, in top-down ways that aren't Baptist in particular, or in ways that are blind to local church context or cultural differences, right? You know, how can we articulate principles and categories of things, not be like vague, be detailed enough to plant seeds around application and say legal duties, right? But create a document, and by virtue of our conversations of 3 years and going, create a renewed ministers' council community where there are, from early in our ministry throughout it, and aided by this updated tool and a renewal of commitment, right? That there are settings in which we are listening to each other, supporting each other, doing case studies with each other, being able to call out early warning signals around ill health, all that stuff. And so what you call into our conversation is really like, what does the culture of our ministerial family look like on the ground, right? In terms of prevention and intervention. Corey, you have anything to add to that?
Yes, if I can find my unmute button, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying there, Gloria. I think for me, there was one key thing that Jackie said there about the health does not look like being a lone ranger. And I know, Jackie, that's not what you said, but and you know, whatever, there's interesting placement here in the preamble, but seeking out best practices from others and sharing my guidance. That is, for me, I actually think being in community with ministers as much as we can objectively makes us better ministers. So I kind of see it as a call to now how these things how these relationships develop and how these things flesh out and how the community looks. There's quite a diversity to that. But I have noticed in my own life, and of course, there's also research to support that the more connected I am with other ministers, the more different ideas I'm hearing, the more I'm being challenged by other perspectives, the better of a leader I am. So that's what I'm hearing in this. But of course there is, I think part of what you're saying is what maybe part of the concern is that the people who most need the guidance, the people who most need to be in touch with this are hard to find, hard to get to, hard to penetrate. And maybe that's part of the reality you're tapping into. So that's true. But I see this as just that affirmation about being connected.
All right. So in light of that, Corey, should we leave it with best practices from others, or as you stated, other ministers or denominational leaders, because others is so broad brush that how can we, you see, I because I've lived through the nightmare of pastor who was unethical, and also what I'm doing currently is I'm doing coaching where concentration with ministers. So I'm able to see firsthand some of the challenges that our people are going through. And so once again, it's when you're sick, when you're running into ethical issues, 9 times out of 10, it's because you're ministerially sick. And just trying to, when I'm doing well, then this doesn't really impact me, but it's when I'm not doing well, this has a major impact. So I don't want to kind of beat the horse anymore with that, but that's, I want to share that.
Thank you for that, Gloria. And really, truly, I mean, the blessing of having a small group in a conversation is that we can go deeper with each other, right? In each of the topics. So, you know, I'm glad for that. And I would just, as we move on to the document, just go ahead and say a couple last things on this. So, just to clarify, the document that we're looking at, and that's at ministerscouncil.com on the homepage as proposed revisions. That has been already approved by the representative body, and so the chapters by the body of representatives of the nation, right, who attended the meeting in November 2020. And so the chapters are now in the process of an up or down vote on this document. So we're not like adding words that could make a sentence a little bit more specific or grammatically stronger, that sort of thing. And then, but I would say that, you know, best practices from others, you know, I think all of us who care about multidisciplinary wisdom and all that would say that, you know, we seek wisdom from people outside of the institution, you know, often. But I've made a note to remember that for future conversations, Gloria. And then secondly, and this, wow, this is like really at the heart of what you're saying about the intersection of our health and our wisdom, right? Falling prey to selfishness and temptation of all kinds. It's one of the reasons that I love, you know, and I think it's been 10 or 12 years since the council captured this slogan, centeredness, competence, collegiality, right? And I love the fact that we've kind of obligated ourselves to reflection and activities that support centeredness, because it's in these habits that indeed we take care of that well that you're talking about, you know, as individuals and in community, nurturing for the greatest wisdom, restraint, etc. So Lori, would you like to add something here before I move on?
Yeah, just real quickly. I actually have a real appreciation for this document. And it's because I think it's not just for ministers. I think every single person in a congregation should know that this exists.
Yeah.
And it's not as a gotcha document for ministers, but I see congregations as working together as a system to help keep their pastors healthy. It's the congregation's responsibility for that too. It's not just the pastor. And so there was actually it was just within here's my true confession. I did not know this was going on.
The ratification process?
Yeah, I didn't know.
Well, here's to us not giving up on communications.
Yeah. So not having known that, it was just several months ago that we brought up the current document in a conversation in cabinet, in what we call cabinet, and we had a conversation about it. So anyway, that's just to say that it's good for everybody to know.
So thank you so much for that. I would refer you all to the website. If you go under resources to click the existing document, 2006, you'll see there something I didn't know until I was on the subcommittee, which is that colleagues in Nebraska in the early 2000s wrote a version of a kind of handbook, if you will, for pastors and lay leaders to read the document together and have conversation about it together.
Very good.
Yeah, so that's not on the front of our stove of documents to be revising, but I will say to you, of course, there's been a pattern of feedback in our conversations to echo what you've just said, and I think, you know, I could see it as a project over the next year or two, taking on sharing that document more widely, or, you know, updating it in some way. There is an existing discussion guide for the Code of Ethics, also on the website, that's geared toward ministers. We're in the process, kind of in tandem, to updating that learning guide as we're moving through this ratification process, in hopes that it'll be ratified and we'll have a learning guide right there ready to publish. But that thing about conversations with lay leaders is really significant. Yeah. So scrolling down again, as I mentioned earlier, the phrase about social media got added to the paragraph about various ways we're disciplined. And so constructive use of social media was the language we inserted into that. The opening of that paragraph is slightly different than the 2006 version because it's where we inserted the striving for mental, physical, spiritual, emotional well-being as a replacement for I will strive for good health habits or something like that. And both of those topics, again, the social media and the health thing, were the focus of MC Live conversations. You can see the recordings of those on our website in the video archive from the spring and summer of 2020. Moving on then, one of the responses of the pattern of response in the survey was, in the open-ended question, what else should we be thinking about? The prevalence of bivocational ministry today compared to a decade or more ago. And so the old document has that I will see my employment as my primary obligation, something to that effect. I can pull that document up in a second if you want, but it uses the language primary obligation of how we think about our paid ministry. And so as an amendment in honor of the feedback from our bivocational ministers, we instead put language here: I will strive for balance and work toward being fully present in my obligation, right? So what does fully present mean? It means for sure, being able to say to ourselves and God and our colleagues and our church leaders, I'm all here to the degree we've agreed upon, to the degree we've agreed upon. And I think implicit in this, of course, is our understanding that so often those agreements need to be refreshed, challenged, updated to make our ministry sustainable. Thoughts or questions about topics related to those two things, the discipline paragraph or this piece about being fully present?
Jackie?
Yeah.
I'm being serious about this. I know that this is being voted up or down, and
Yeah.
this is not a conversation about changing things. But 10 years from now, can you add wholesome family and relationship and friendship? Because pastors are some of the loneliest, friendless people out there.
So
I mean, it's a real problem.
Yeah. So beautiful addition. And what I would say is that we don't have to wait 10 years for there to be a meaningful shift, a moving of the needle in the quality of that witness and support of that, right? The learning guide that we're working on to kind of flesh out these paragraphs and such in a way that is a tool for collegial conversation about these things. The section about discipline life and well-being, the wholesome family relationships, easy enough for us to be sensitive in the learning guide narrative because we're informed by conversations like this to remind people that it's not just family relationships that are significant, right? And perhaps in the preamble to the learning guide to talk about the significance of friendships. It's kind of this implicit piece, right? Your point being, I mean, it's implicit to together in ministry, but your point being that we want to have a culture of holding ourselves and each other accountable in the best sense of the word, to doing self-inventory on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I took notes. I'm taking notes. All right. We're going to wrap this up here in the next couple minutes, and then I just want to turn the floor over to Corey here after we finish the document itself. This next yellow section, well, actually, let me just highlight this. In case you want notes from tonight's review of the document, if you pull this document up from the website version, the first 2 pages are the document. Pages 3 and 4 are basically verbatim notes of the presentation made in November 2020 that goes through and explains each of these changes. But since I don't want to make you dizzy or have an epileptic seizure, I'm not going back and forth between the top pages and the bottom pages. So the 3 initial leanings, social media, plagiarism, using our power. This sentence, I will be constantly mindful of my ministerial status, position, and authority, and I will use them to advocate for those in need. That's straight out a sentence added to the previous document. That sentence went through some permutations. The initial draft language had a lot more language of addressing systemic injustice, prophetic work of Jesus and the prophets. And our feedback in the survey from a number of concerned people was that we were perhaps unintentionally broadcasting a message that had a narrower political or theological vocabulary than our body has for how we address suffering and need. And also that a document that's intended to serve a diversely gifted body of ministers, right, should have, in it, should not tilt toward there's only one way to address need, right? And so this language, using power to advocate for those in need, was a response to those conversations. I will not plagiarize. Straight up, everyone thought we should add that, and no one thought anything else about proposed language. That was kind of the easy one. Our colleague Mary Day Miller, who's the executive in Massachusetts, did her dissertation on plagiarism in ministry. And so she's helping us write the learning guide, and it's going to be featured in that little section to flesh out what that is and what that isn't in today's age. And then going on to this last section, 2 pieces in the section that we ended up categorizing and naming as collegiality. Obviously, some of these points could be put in more than one of the 3 headers, but from our executive ministers, a comment that the previous statement, which was about supporting colleagues who face discrimination, that we should raise the bar there and work to gain greater awareness and sensitivity. So naming that it's a matter of our right use of power and excellence, to gain greater awareness, and then to discern and undertake my obligations for support. This is the paragraph in the existing document, 2006, where it ends the paragraph with a lengthy demographic list, right? So those who are facing racism, sexism, ageism, etc., right? And so what we did was took out the list to keep this sentence at the level of principle, undergirding action. And the learning guide that will be published after this is finished will take people into some depth on each of those topics about what does it mean to gain greater awareness about racism and sexism and ableism, ageism, etc. And we will add in that tool, which is not a code of ethics obligation, right? Sections that acknowledge that this topic is of contemporary interest and need across our body, though we have differences theologically, to gain awareness of discrimination faced by LGBT people. And so that will be like in that tool for discussion, not like in a document that people have to vote yes or no on. And then just closing out the document presentation itself. Again, this, like the thing from the bivocational ministers, was a hardy pattern in that survey from early 2020. Just the weight and the burden of being impacted by our predecessors who have not left well, or seeing the damage in the church of predecessors who have not left well. And so the existing document says that we will sever our ministerial ties. Our proposed language, for the sake of softening and therefore greater clarity and buy-in, is to discontinue our roles, right? And so we look forward to lots of conversation and sharing about worst practices and best practices in this regard, and how people have worked out those boundaries. I believe it is on our website, or will shortly be on our website, a best practices video about this from Chicago. where Pastor Emeritus and incoming pastor together did a webinar for us, reflecting on how they navigated that process over those first couple of years. And the learning guide surely will address the topic of Pastor Emeritus as kind of a sub context in this. So we have another 10 minutes or so for listening and conversation. I'm inclined to take the document down so I can see your faces better.
Actually, can
Go
you?
ahead.
Well,
Unless you have an objection, so go ahead.
I kind of want it up there, but I don't want to take up all the time. So I was going to give somebody else a chance to talk.
Yeah, okay. So did you have something to add or ask about, Lori?
Yeah, I just feel like I've been talking a lot. So I wanted to give somebody else a chance to hop on first before me.
All right, and then I'm also going to put the link to the document in the chat box, okay? Gloria, Joyce, Corey. Put it right back, Lori.
Okay. So the part under collegiality, and you took it down. I can't. Yeah.
I didn't down long enough to put the link in the chat box.
D.
Yeah.
That's actually why we discussed this with our cabinet, because Tom Beers and I were in a pastoral partnership, and Tom resigned, and so now it's just me. We're in an interim period trying to figure out what we're going to do. And Tom was very clear about this, and so we wanted to have a conversation about it. But my church, is interesting because it is where a lot, and I mean a lot, of former clergy retire to.
Yeah.
And so what isn't spelled out here, and this is again something for you to write down for 10 years from now, is there are some people who retire very well and can come into a congregation and respect the current pastor. They know how to use their gifts in that situation. There's a very good relationship between pastor and the retiring pastor, or retiring clergy. But there are also situations where, and I think you'll understand this, I think being a retiring pastor is very different in a lot of ways than other professions, because it's so much a part of your identity. And it's very difficult to give up. So there have been situations at our church where this has not gone well at all. I mean, been very destructive. The problem is these are not former constituents.
Yeah, they're not former staff.
They're not, yeah. These are pastors who weren't ready to retire.
Yeah.
And so, I'm trying to figure out what to do about that. I mean, in a very positive way, like if a former clergy comes to join, do we interview them? Do we talk about how to use their gifts? And, not in a punishing way, but to recognize that this is a really big change for them. So anyway,
I just want to thank you for bringing that up. I think that will just further enrich our conversations in writing and sharing with each other going forward. And I think, I've been present at maybe not 100% of the conversations over the last 3.5 years, but probably pretty close. I don't think anyone else has brought that up, Lori, and I value that, and have kind of my own personal testimony that you've called to mind for me to chew on and pray on about some difficulties in the past, and so thank you for that. Yeah. Gloria, Corey, Joyce, anything to add by way of questions or thoughts on the document?
Yeah, I'd like to bounce something off that Lori said. One of the things that has been really important to me since I was in seminary was the recognition that everyone in a congregation is a minister. That, there was back in the 80s, there was this big wave of emphasis on the ministry of the whole people of God. And not that the professional leaders were more ministerial than anyone else, but that we all share an equal ministry. And if we have in our congregations several or even one other retired pastor or other ministerial leader, that I think their gifts need to be shared just as much as someone who is is working in a grocery store. That those that the gifts, the spiritual gifts and the talents that God's given to each of us need to be used and used wisely.
Yeah. Well, this thread here that the two of you are speaking into, that will help us. We lean into this conversation about this kind of dynamic in order to help people be proactive and clear, make a mental map that makes the most sense for their context, right?
Yep.
And this will only benefit us. I'm going to give it to Corey in a second, unless Gloria has anything to ask or speak into, in which case the floor is yours, Gloria.
Yes, very quickly. I reached out to Randy because I had not heard from anyone in a good while as to who I should be in contact with related to New Jersey Minister Council, and he informed me there is none. So how does New Jersey fit into all of this as it relates to their input?
Yeah, perfect. A timely question. So there are a number of chapters who've had a historic activity and engagement with each other and with national life that have found themselves in some doldrums or inactivity for some time, a year or two or 3 or 4. And so New Jersey is in fact on our list of chapters which have not officially disbanded, but are in that period of inactivity. So over the next 2 or 3 months, we are actually having, very intentional outreach support conversations. We want to know what we can do to breathe life into a geographical setting where there might be people on the ground who would like to burst that inertia, right? You know how things get on the back burner and no one knows who's on first or second, So I'd just be delighted to be in follow-up conversation with you. I don't have the roster handy, but we do have the names and email addresses of people who've previously been submitted to us as contact people, but they haven't been engaged, in a two-way street in some time. So I'm especially glad you're here.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I'm here too.
Yeah, and also I would say there's been a little seed planted over the last couple of years about the future, Lori. I don't know if it's 10 years out or hopefully much, much shorter than that. Trying to think about how we can create some at-large representation in Ministers' Council business to be inclusive of people who find themselves in parts of the country where there's not a chapter. And we want to do that carefully because we believe in chapters. We want to support chapters being resilient and having longevity. So that would be relevant also to the conversation. Corey, tell us your heart.
Okay. So it's the top of the hour, and I'm not going to take up too much time. And I also don't know how much I might be preaching to the choir with those gathered on this call currently. So if to any extent that's the case, for those who might watch the recording later, I'm not sure. But for those who missed the introduction, I was not involved with these revisions, but I reached out to Jackie because I thought they have done such a wonderful job, and I wanted to lend my support to getting this document ratified by 2/3 of our chapters, if we can do that. I'm sure all of you in some way or another have worked on updating things in your ministry settings. My congregation recently updated our Constitution and bylaws, and what fun it was, right? But that whenever you do something like that, you're dealing with all the personalities, all the opinions, all the differences, and trying to create this something to honor the umbrella that you're under, and try to do something that honors what the identity of the family is, and promotes best practices for your group going forward. Now imagine trying to do that for ministers. I mean, if regular old Christians are opinionated, boy howdy, pastors are, right? We have this American Baptist family is a really big umbrella, and we have a very big umbrella in very divisive times. I have to say that if I was called upon to do something like this, to try to revise a guiding document for our covenant and code of ethics with the diversity that I know is within our American Baptist pastors and chaplains and leaders, I would flee to Tarshish, I think. But I have known Jackie for many years now. I've known Steve Neal for many years now, some of these names that you might have heard in the introduction. I know their heart. Jackie said for me to share my heart. I know their heart. I know the competence and the inclusiveness and the care and the compassion with which they approach everything they do. And when I was kind of let in on the process, when I was brought up to speed on this process that at the time I didn't fully know was going on. And when I read the document, when I read the proposed changes, when I read about the feedback and all of the ways that they tried to get feedback, and the changes that they made in response to the feedback, I really don't think that it could have been done any better. Now, that doesn't mean that, a couple of you mentioned some things that you might like to see in the future and some wording changes. I'll tell you, me too. Is everything worded the way I want it to be worded? No. When I read about the process, there were things that were taken out or softened that I wish had been left, but it was done in response to feedback. It was done in response to dialogue. And we have something here that, this is a time when self-interested individualism threatens to tear us apart. When siloing threatens to tear us apart, and read the news when clergy misbehavior continues to put a stain on our profession. So given the work that has been done and the spirit in which the work has been done, no, not everything's worded the way I want it to be either, but this has always been a great document. These updates are needed. And so I reached out to Jackie to say, I want to do everything I can to help get this ratified. That's why I'm here. Thanks for letting me speak a couple of minutes.
Wow, thanks. Thanks for that. I needed to go to church today, actually, and that was wonderful. 11 chapters have voted. We're in the process of knocking on doors and listening closely to see if anyone's home. And some of the chapters who haven't been actively engaged in recent times, we want to just do this with the most inclusive and outreachy spirit. And our bylaws, obligate us to finish that up this year. So we're more than halfway through that timeline. I appreciate your prayers and your recommendations. If you are in settings that haven't voted yet, I think that's true of PBA and of New Jersey. I know that's true of New Jersey, and I believe also PBA. So I'd encourage you to follow up with me after this, and we can talk together perhaps about what it would look like on the ground to engage people in conversation, even if the chapter itself might not structurally be at a place of vitality to have a business vote, right? Like, the point is our relationships, right? And maybe conversations like this can be a part of renewing vitality in some of the places across the country. So please reach out to me and follow up if you will. I'm going to skip the announcements for the sake of time, but I'll say that there's grant money available for starting covenant groups, and there's grant money for chapters who are trying to do something new and cohesion building. Check those out on the website.
If one sentence, what's a covenant group?
Clergy groups formed with intention to support each other over time. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you for this time, and thank you for letting some of us who weren't part of the process.
It's why we're here.
Come on the tail end.
Yeah, Gloria, Lori, Joyce, each of you brought incredible, important additions to this conversation, and the word of the Lord does not go out in vain, no matter what.
Quick question. Is it Joyce that her name is Galaxy Tab?
Yeah.
What is your last name,